Hey guys, Happy New Year! I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas and that you're enjoying your holidays so far. This channel is about to be 2 years old and I want to thank each and every one of you who make it all worthwhile. As most of you already know, my uploading schedule is all over the place. So if you haven't hit the notification button yet, please do so. And for those of you who are new, please subscribe if you like creepy Japanese stories because that's all I do. Now, the following stories are taken from a credible source, a famous online magazine in Japan called Bunshin Online, so it's pretty safe to say that they're probably all true. The last 2 stories have been shared by a famous priest who encounters numerous strange and paranormal phenomena due to his job description, so keep that in mind when listening. It will probably make the stories even creepier. Alright, enough talking from me. Let's get started. I had just entered high school and was commuting 2 hours one way. I spent most of it on the train. The early morning train was always crowded and I was lucky if I could get a seat. If I had to stand, it was hell. Even if you're a high school student, standing for 2 hours is tough, especially when you're squeezed into a tight space and people are pushing and bumping into you all the time. So whenever I would get on, I would desperately look for an open seat. In addition to that, I also watched the others and tried to detect whether they would be getting off at the next station. It seems silly now, but at the time, for me, whether I could sit on my way to school was a matter of life and death. It meant I could read, play games, and even do some last-minute studying before an exam, so securing a seat was of utmost importance. Then I realized that one particular seat was always empty. I won't go into detail because I might be identified, but it was on the 6:30 a.m. train running on a local line. It was the corner of the box seats at the front of the third carriage, and for some reason, no one ever sat in that seat. Ever. I felt lucky to have discovered this, and from then on, I started using it as my own personal space. I sat there and enjoyed reading while watching the other passengers fight for a place to sit. But one day, those comfortable train rides came to an abrupt end. It was mid-July and I was sitting in my special spot. My final exams were over, so I decided to relax and read a comic book called Full Metal Alchemist. Maybe this was the mistake. After a while, I started to hear something behind me. It sounded like someone was muttering something. At first, I thought it was a sound coming from another carriage, or I was just hearing things. But I was wrong. The sound gradually grew louder, and I began to feel lukewarm air caressing my neck. There was no way warm air like that could be flowing into the summer commuter train where the air conditioning was on full blast. Still, I tried to convince myself that some of the outside air was leaking in from a gap somewhere. The next moment, I felt a sharp pain on my neck, as if someone was scratching me with their nails. And at the same time, the muttering voice from behind me suddenly got closer. I was afraid to turn around, but I also couldn't ignore it, so I slowly did so. Right behind me was some kind of human form. It had no eyes or mouth, just a pure white, smooth face like a boiled egg. It had no hair and looked like a mannequin, but it was overwhelmingly different at the same time. Even though it didn't have a mouth, it continued to mutter something to itself, and what freaked me out the most was that it was beginning to stretch its fingers towards my shoulders. Its fingertips were pure white, except the index finger. That finger was stained blood red. My whole body froze. I was so scared that I forgot to breathe. I was feeling cold but was suddenly drenched in sweat, and I came close to pissing myself too. I had to get away, and I screamed and jumped out of my seat. I grabbed my backpack and, pushing the passengers around me, ran to another carriage. I made my way to the very last one, carriage number 8, and jumped off the train at the next station. I didn't have the courage to look back because I felt like it was chasing me. That day, I told my parents I felt sick and went straight home without going to school. When I got back, I got undressed and was shocked to see that the back of my uniform, the part that had been touching the back of the seat, was wet with something dark. It looked like blood. Since then, I stopped riding that particular train. I don't know what it is that I saw. No one believes me, not even my family or friends. However, years later, when I talked to a psychic acquaintance about this, he said, "There are many places where dangerous things tend to gather." Someone with little psychic ability like myself can't sense their presence even when they're in the midst of such places. A regular person might feel uncomfortable or get some kind of unsettling feeling, that gut instinct that people often refer to when they unknowingly enter that space. He suggested that I must have ignored that feeling due to my desperation, which led to that terrifying experience. It has traumatized me so much that even when I find an empty seat on a crowded train, I hesitate for a moment before I sit because, well, I still can't get the image of that thing out of my head. Have you ever heard of the job title, rental girlfriend? You may have a rough idea of what it is even if you've never heard of it because it's exactly what the name suggests. You pay a certain fee for a set period of time to rent out a girlfriend. I found out about it when a female university student I know, let's call her Yoshida, told me she was doing this part-time job. Let me jump in here real quick. I just did a Google search about it for the first time and would like to share the first result that popped up. Here we are. Take a look at this company based in Tokyo. It's just one of many companies that hire girls of all ages and types to be rented out as girlfriends for men. You can see their profile pictures and choose your date that way, or you can choose the kind of dates you'd like to have, such as something active like going to watch a sporting event or to Disneyland, or something more quiet like having a nice conversation at a cafe or taking a walk. By choosing the type of date you'd like to go on, certain girls are pre-selected due to their personality types. Prices are calculated based on the women's experience. The more experienced they are, the more expensive, plus a set fee depending on the location and how many hours you want the date to last. It's amazing businesses like this actually exist, but it doesn't really surprise me that Japan has something like this. It makes me wonder if they'd be successful overseas though. For those of you living abroad, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think men in your country would pay for such a service? Let me know in the comments. Back to the story. According to Yoshida, the job mainly involves talking to customers and eating with them, which, to put it simply, involves listening to their troubles and complaints that they can't tell anyone else. This time, I'd like to share something she experienced from her perspective. When I started this job, my first customer was a plump man in his mid-30s with long hair who always wore a backpack. He had difficulty talking to women and had applied to rent a girlfriend to practice so that he could improve those skills in his everyday life. At first, he was so nervous that he couldn't even look at me. He constantly kept his gaze down and didn't say anything, so I gave him some pointers on how to start up a conversation.
Why don't you try asking me what my hobbies are? Oh, right. So, what are your hobbies?
His voice trembled slightly.
Well, my hobby is collecting bear goods. Oh, I see.
The man looked down again, so I quickly jumped back in and said,
You need to expand on the topic and ask questions like what kind of goods I'm talking about. Right, what kind of goods? Things like keychains and stuffed toys?
An hour quickly passed of me giving him pointers and him following my lead. Before we parted ways, I told him that I thought he would look better if he cut his hair. When I returned to my apartment where I lived alone, I wondered whether I went too far in telling him to change his hairstyle and the way he spoke. but I just shrugged it off, thinking he probably wouldn't rent me out again because I was a bit too harsh. After about a week, however, I received a call from the company saying that the man had requested me again. I was happy to be able to work, so I went to the cafe where we were to meet. To my surprise, the man had cut his hair.
Wow, you cut your hair. You look great.
The man smiled happily as I said this, saying it was the first time in his life that a woman had complimented him. He said he felt a bit more confident and asked whether there was anything else he should change. I was proud to hear this and without hesitation proceeded to give him more advice. I told him that many women care about the physical appearance too, and that he should lose some weight if possible. I'm well aware it was a bit rude to say this to a person I'd only met twice, but he took it well, saying he completely understood. When our hour was over, he seemed to make up his mind and said,
I brought a present for you today. Can I give it to you?
The man zipped open his backpack, took out a large paper bag with a cute ribbon on it, and handed it to me. Inside it was a cute stuffed teddy bear with a hat on it. It was very sweet of him to go out of his way to get me a teddy bear, so I thanked him and told him that I'd cherish it. He told me it was the first time any woman had ever been happy with the present he'd given them. It was at this moment, seeing him so happy, that I was glad to be doing this job. It made me feel like I could truly help men. I could give them confidence and make them realize their worth. It was about a week later when the man booked me again. When I went to our usual cafe, the man showed up dragging his right leg. When I asked him what happened, he said with a wry smile that he had started running a marathon to lose weight but sprained his ankle because he wasn't used to exercising. I'd advised him to lose some weight on our previous date and he'd taken it seriously, wasting no time putting it into action. What an honest and hardworking guy he is, I thought. He had a pure heart which made me like him even more. After about an hour of talking, the man again took out a gift from his bag and said,
I have a present for you today too.
Inside the bag were slippers with a teddy bear attached. I thanked him again, telling him I'd treasure these along with the teddy bear he'd given me the previous week. The man looked really happy as he left. After returning to my room, I felt a bit tired and fell asleep. When I woke up, it was morning and I tried to eat something, but I felt feverish and had no appetite. I thought maybe I had caught a cold, so I went to a nearby hospital to get some medicine and rested at home. But the next day, the day after that, and even after a week, my condition didn't improve at all and my cold-like symptoms continued. The man had requested another date during that time, but I felt too weak and unwell, so I declined. It was the end of the month and rent was due. I needed this job because the allowance my parents were giving me wasn't enough to cover my living expenses. I didn't have the luxury to be bedridden for days on end, but I felt so under the weather without any signs of getting better. I was starting to feel stressed. It was around then that the man reached out again. This time, I had to take it, so even though I still felt like crap, I went to go meet him. We met at our usual cafe, and the man arrived looking concerned, asking me how I was feeling. He was also wearing a mask over his mouth as he said,
I caught a bit of a cold too. What kind of symptoms do you have? Maybe I can find a good hospital for you to go get checked.
It was really nice of him to be so concerned for me and going out of his way to find me a good doctor. I told him how I felt and for how long, as he wrote in his little notebook. As the date drew to a close, he took out a big bag from his backpack yet again, saying he had a present for me. Yet again. Inside the bag was a stuffed bear. He said,
I'm really glad you came. I hope this bear helps you get through your cold.
When I got home, not only did I have a fever, but I also felt nauseous. I probably pushed myself too hard. By that night, I also had a stomachache which gave me bad diarrhea. I was in pain and was having cold sweats all through the night. I hugged the stuffed bear the man had given me, but I could barely get any sleep. I hadn't been attending class since I first started to feel ill, so worried, my friend from uni came to check on me the following day. When I answered the door, she couldn't hide the look of surprise on her face, even if she had tried. I'd lost a bit of weight, had bags under my eyes from lack of sleep, and as she put it, looked like a zombie. After letting her in, she noticed the teddy bear I still had in my arms and said,
What's up with that bear? Where'd you get it?
It was as if she was accusing me of something, and I didn't like the tone of her voice. I told her that one of my customers had given it to me. She asked me whether he gave me anything else, so I showed her the other gifts as well. As soon as she saw them, my friend told me to take these things to the temple right away. I didn't know what she was going on about, but I was in a state where medicine wasn't helping and was feeling like death, so I decided to entertain her and do as I was told. When I took it to the temple, the head priest agreed with what my friend had said. He suggested that my friend might have some sort of psychic ability even if she wasn't aware of it herself. He had felt something unsettling about the gifts, and after staring at them for a few moments, he asked me if he could cut the seams and open all the teddy bears up. He wanted to see the stuffing. I really liked those bears because they were adorable, but I didn't want to go against the priest, so I reluctantly agreed. I watched in horror as the priest cut the seams of the hat that the bear was wearing, and out fell a bunch of hair. It made sense. The man had come with his hair cut short on that date. He must have swapped the stuffing of that hat with his hair. The priest then opened the seams of the teddy bears that were attached to the indoor slippers. On that particular date, the man showed up limping. When those seams were undone, a few toenail flakes fell out. Finally, the last teddy bear that I was hugging at night. There were 3 front teeth inside. The man was wearing a mask not because he had a cold, but because he didn't have any front teeth. I can't go into detail here, but in addition to hair, toenails, and teeth, there was also another item inside. It's a type of curse that is done in some countries, and it's possible that the man was using the rental girlfriend service to experiment with casting curses on other people. The priest burned the 3 gifts, performed some sort of ritual, and my condition miraculously began to improve. There's a phrase in the sutra that means return to oneself. This means that the actions you do to others and the words you say will always come back to you. So, this man may be suffering right now as the curse he cast on me returns to him. The following content may be disturbing to some people and includes a baby. Viewer discretion is advised. This story will be told from the perspective of the priest who shared his experience. Let's begin. Some people say that young people these days are bad at socializing or that they tend to run away from relationships, but I'm not so sure about that. The reason is that share houses, which are rental properties with low rent and where a bunch of people live together, are more popular than ever. And honestly, there's nothing more difficult and sometimes annoying than to interact with total strangers in this kind of setting. It's impossible to avoid the troublesome social interactions that can occur. In Japan, it's more like a dormitory, so you might be living with complete strangers from the get-go. People seek out share houses, and the real estate will give you a room if there's availability. It's different from renting an entire house under your name and deciding to live with your friends later. It's actually illegal to sublet rooms without prior approval from the real estate. So, one reason it's popular is of course the low rent, but it's not just students who live there like you might assume. An increasing number of people are choosing to live in share houses even if they have a job and are earning a decent income. Now, let me tell you a mysterious incident related to one such place. One day, a real estate agent came to the temple with 2 people. One was the owner of a share house. The other was a female student attending a university in Kyoto. I asked the girl how her older sister was doing, to which she replied that she was doing much better. The sister in question was running late because the roads were congested that day. About 10 minutes later, the sister arrived with her husband in tow. She apologized for being late. I first met the bunch 6 months ago. The real estate agent called me late one night asking me to come meet him in front of a particular shrine immediately. I had no idea what was going on, but hearing the urgency in the man's voice made my way over as quickly as possible. When I arrived at the shrine, there were several police cars parked there. When the agent saw me, he grabbed my arm and led me into a narrow alley next to the shrine and down to a large house. Police were going in and out, and ignoring my question as to what was going on, the agent told me to go inside. It was an old traditional Japanese home with a long hallway stretching out from the entrance. The police were gathered outside the bedroom door at the very end of it, and as we approached, said to us that they would be leaving now. In their wake stood a female university student. She bowed her head down as she apologized to them. Although the exterior of the house was old, the inside had been renovated and turned into a share house. Right next to the entrance was a set of stairs leading up to the second floor, where there was a shared kitchen, living room, toilet, and bath. The first floor had 6 rooms in total, 3 on each side of the long stretch of hallway, and according to the realtor, 5 of them were occupied. The woman sitting in front of me now used to live in the second room on the left. She had been there for 2 months and was enjoying herself. The room was nice and she got along with all her housemates, but there was just one thing that she wished she could do something about. And it was the loud snoring coming from another uni student a year above her that lived next door. She wasn't used to noises like that as she grew up in the countryside and slept surrounded by the soft chirping of crickets. She began losing sleep because of the incessant snoring piercing through the wall. She tried using earplugs, but having them in the whole night bothered her even more. Soon, she started showing up late to class because she couldn't wake up in the morning. She considered talking to her housemate, but felt like it would be wrong to bring it up to her senior, since it wasn't something she could control anyway. Alas, after tolerating this for 2 months, she finally decided to reach out to the landlord to see if she could switch rooms and move into the empty one at the end of the hall. He flat out refused, saying that the room wasn't available, but after much begging, he finally relented and agreed. On one condition: to never use the closet in the room. It was originally a Japanese-style oshire, or closet in English, to store futons in, but had been renovated into a Western-style one. The owner explained that none of the other rooms had a built-in closet and it would be unfair to the others if she were to use it. And that was the reason the room was never leased, and thus the reason why she wasn't allowed to use it. Of course, he could have made the rent a bit more expensive just for this room, but that meant he had to talk to all the current residents and decide who would rent the room. She agreed that it would be too tedious, so she agreed to his condition and moved in. The owner explained to the others that the move was allowed due to the fact that the floorboards were getting too old and creaky in her old room, and therefore she had to move out of it. That was, of course, a lie. She was excited and felt extremely relieved. She could finally get a good night's rest. Well, that's what she thought, because from the very first night she moved in, she could hear it through the night. A swooshing sound coming from somewhere. It sounded more like air was coming in from a gap somewhere, but it was faint and was nothing like the vibrating snores she'd had to cope with for the past couple of months, so she was content. However, on the second night, it was a very faint voice that woke her up. Something that sounded like a cat meowing. She was still half asleep and wondered if her housemate from 2 doors down was making strange noises. Maybe the sound of her snores were different because she wasn't breathing well or something. She still laid in bed with her eyes closed, listening to the strange sound. A few minutes went by when she realized something. The sounds were getting louder, almost as if it was coming from the next room, the now empty room where she used to live. She opened her eyes and listened harder. No, it wasn't coming from next door. It was coming from inside the closet. Was it just? Maybe it was reverberating and just sounded like it was coming from inside the closet. That's what she thought. But again, no. The more she listened, the more sure she was. She forgot the promise she'd made to the owner, walked over to it, and slowly opened the door. She screamed so loud that it woke everyone up. They rushed over to her room and banged on her door, asking if she was okay. She screamed over and over to call the police, and shortly after that was when I was called. Because the girl saw it as clear as day with her own 2 eyes, she told the police that she swore she wasn't lying and told them to check inside the closet several times, even though the police triple-checked and found it to be completely empty. Although they could see the girl was clearly shaken up and trembling, there was nothing else the police could do. The girl had no choice but to apologize to them, and that's when I arrived. After the police left, I went upstairs with everyone that lived there to hear what happened, and when she explained what she saw, everyone's blood ran cold. She explained in a trembling voice that when she opened the closet, she saw a baby hanging from its neck by a tie. I turned to the owner, who also showed up after being called by the real estate agent, and asked if there was anything he could tell us. He looked at his hands and breathed out, bowing his head down to everyone. And with his head still down, he said,
"This place was renovated into a house after a certain incident."
He looked up with a pained expression on his face and continued,
"This house was previously rented to a couple with a newborn baby, but the wife began to suffer from postpartum depression. The baby wouldn't stop crying, wouldn't do as she wanted, and wouldn't listen to her. So she tied a necktie around the baby's neck and hanged her baby from the clothes rack in the closet. The baby died shortly thereafter."
Everyone looked at one another in utter shock and sat there speechless. They probably had no idea they were living in a house with such a tragic past. I got everyone on their feet and led them back downstairs, where I read out a sutra as we all put our hands together in prayer in front of the closet. A few days later, the real estate agent, the owner, and the female student went to the temple to inform me that they closed the share house, and then the student said something that took everyone by surprise. She said,
"I have an older sister who got married not long ago, but she and her husband are struggling to have children. When I told her what happened at the share house, she told me she wants that baby to be reborn as her child. Do you have any kind of incantations that might make that happen?"
I told her I'd try, but that I couldn't promise her anything. And from that day forward, I held a session every single day for the girl's older sister and her husband. That brings us back to the present day. She came to the temple with her sister and her husband to report that they had been blessed with a baby. We of course don't know if it is the reincarnation of the baby that met an abrupt and heartbreaking end in that house, but if it is, we pray that this baby will live a long, happy life. Alright, that's the end for the very first video of the year 2025. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please be safe as you celebrate the new year, and see you again in the next video. Cheers.